In today's episode of Today in World War II, January 10th, the Germans somehow allowed their invasion plans of Western Europe to fall into Allied hands. German dive bombers put a Royal Navy carrier out of action in the Mediterranean. Another key position falls from the British to the Japanese in the Malayan offensive to take Singapore. The worst submarine loss in World War II for the American Navy happened off of New Guinea. And finally, the Finns continued to push out their erstwhile German allies out of northern Finland. Let's get started. Okay, so on today's date, January 10th, 1940, a German aircraft with an officer on board who just happened to be carrying the plans for the entire German invasion of the Low Countries, Holland and Belgium, crash landed in neutral Belgium, and the plans obviously fell into the hands of Belgian intelligence. Makes you wonder what they were doing, why they would allow that to happen. But you know what? Even the Germans aren't incapable of making blunders as well as we see in the war. But in this case, you would think that that would have been a key thing. Obviously, if you know exactly what your enemy is going to do, you can prepare for it. Do you believe that the Allies thought it was a setup and that these were fake? And so these plans were not really ever exploited. Well, I tell you what, it makes you think sometimes in 39 and 40 that they deserve to get their butts handed to them by the Wehrmacht in the Ardennes campaign in 40 because they here seemed to be doing everything they could to lose the war and lose that battle, which of course they did. Spoiler alert. But what will not cause you to lose your war, whether it be uh, you know, a, an invasion of some other country, or maybe just the fact that you can't stand up to your wife, whatever war you're fighting, you can win that war. But the key thing you need to do is to subscribe to my channel and click the little bell that gives you notifications when it's time for me to drop a new video. As you've probably seen by now, I drop these things every single day. So I really appreciate that. I love to have you guys as subscribers build my following, build my channel, and so on and so forth. So I appreciate it. On January 10th, 1941, whew, boy, German Stuka dive bombers, they may not have done very well in the Battle of Britain. They got shot down left and right. But when they were doing what they were meant to do, which was attack specific targets, they had fighter protection. In this case, they went after the HMS Illustrious, a British aircraft carrier. They hit her with six bombs, destroyed her elevator, and started fires in the hangar deck. It killed about 124 sailors. She had to sail to Malta to receive repairs. I'm thinking to myself, wow. Talk about going from the frying pan to the fire. You're on your way to Malta. You know, you're escorting a convoy. You almost lose your carrier to Stuka dive bombers. And where do you go to get repairs? Malta, which, excuse me, is being bombed every single day. Not exactly the most optimal place to get repairs, but I guess, they didn't have any choice. I mean, she got hit by six bombs. Now, one thing you may or may not know about British carriers, as opposed to American carriers, was British carriers were steel plated. So they had steel runways. The Americans had wood. And even though American control crews were amazingly effective in the war, it's a whole different ballgame. I mean, if an American carrier got hit with six bombs in their flight deck, I don't know if they could have even been saved from being sunk or having to be scuttled. But the Brits, well, it was costlier. It took them longer to build them, and it made them a little slower. But as we'll see later on, when it comes time towards the end of the war, when kamikazes were attacking aircraft carriers, the Brits handled the kamikaze attacks much better than the American carriers did. Just spoiler alert. And it's not a spoiler alert if you like this channel. All you gotta do is just go below the screen. There's a thumbs up and a thumbs down. Hit the thumbs up, leave a comment, and it'll be a Christmas miracle for me, even though Christmas is over. That's how much it means to me. So I can get my content in front of many more people's feeds. And that's important to grow my channel, which is what I think we all want to do. Giving out good content here, folks. So please help me. Right. On January 10th, 1942, the British lost another key position in their defense line north of Singapore in Malaysia, but it was called Malaya back then, about 24 miles southwest of Kuala Lumpur, Port Swettenham. And the Brits had to invade it because it was just too much pressure coming from the unrelenting Japanese offensive down the peninsula into Singapore. Little by little, as we see here, almost every day, I'm giving you a report about more territory and more key defense lines that had to be abandoned by the British and the Commonwealth forces. And we know the inevitable end is coming when they finally do the unthinkable and the Japanese take Singapore. So we'll continue to watch this as things develop in oncoming videos. On January 10th, 1943, one of the biggest, actually the biggest loss of life that occurred for the American submarine service occurred this day with the USS Argonaut. It tried to attack, actually it did attack a Japanese convoy. There were three escort vessels, Japanese escorts that were there to protect the convoy. The Argonaut took a shot at one and did sink it, but the other two were able to get a fix on the Argonaut, depth charged her, eventually sank her, and 102 American sailors were killed. As I said, that was the largest loss of life by any single submarine in the history in World War II in the Pacific. Condolences. Obviously, we're 80 years late, but to the sailors and their families, for committing the ultimate sacrifice. I think it was something like one out of every five American submarine didn't make it back in their tours. So it was not an easy thing they did, but you talk about punching above their weight. And I've mentioned this before in different videos, how the American submarine service does not get enough credit for strangling the Japanese later in the war by sinking the majority of their merchant ships and preventing very necessary raw materials and fuel to get to the home islands. And then finally on January 10th, 1945, the Finns were able to force the German 7th Mountain Division to retreat from a small town in northern Finland in Lapland called Lahteseno. And you might be asking yourself, well, weren't the Finns and the Germans allies in World War II against the Soviet Union? Yes, but look at the date here, January 10th, 1945. The Finns were forced to sign an armistice with the Soviet Union in the fall of 1944. So the war between Finland and the Soviet Union ended in the fall of 44. One of the demands and conditions of the armistice the Soviet Union put on the Finns was they had to militarily force the Germans out of northern Finland, out of Lapland, into Norway. So the Soviets wanted the Finns to do the dirty work for them, and this is the case of the Finns doing that. So they were able to force the Germans completely out of Finland, and so then there were the only Soviet troops were in specific areas that were allowed by treaty for the Soviets. The Germans were kicked out completely. The moral of the story is that if you don't know the history of Finland in World War II, they took it to the Soviets and they took it to the Germans as something. They could fight. So thank you for watching this video. I appreciate it.